Black CEO kicked out of business class by pilot. Then she canceled $500 M deal. I don't care who you think you are. This section is for legitimate business class passengers only. I am exactly who my boarding pass says I am, Captain. Perhaps you should take a closer look. The tension in the first-class cabin was palpable as Eleanor Washington stood calmly at the center of a storm. The silver-haired pilot's face had turned an alarming shade of crimson, his finger jabbing toward the economy section as flight attendants and passengers watched in uncomfortable silence. Eleanor, dressed impeccably in a tailored Navy suit, remained perfectly composed despite the humiliation being heaped upon her. "Ma'am, I've been flying this route for 20 years, and I know my passengers," the pilot, Captain Richard Harmon, insisted. "There's clearly been a mistake with your boarding pass. Security." Eleanor didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her designer briefcase and pulled out her phone. "That's interesting timing, Captain Harmon. I was just about to call your CEO, Thomas Bradley. We're scheduled to sign the acquisition paperwork tomorrow morning, a $500 million deal that would save your airline from bankruptcy." She turned the phone screen toward him, showing the calendar appointment. "But I'm thinking perhaps Westland Airlines isn't the right fit for Washington Enterprises after all." The blood drained from Captain Harmon's face as he finally registered who was standing before him. The murmurs from other passengers grew louder, and several had their phones out, recording the confrontation. There seems to have been a misunderstanding," Captain Harmon stammered. "Indeed there has," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying throughout the now-silent cabin. "And it's going to cost your company $500 million. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Eleanor Washington woke up in her hotel room, preparing for what should have been a routine flight home after a successful business trip. Eleanor didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her designer briefcase and pulled out her phone. "That's interesting timing, Captain Harmon. I was just about to call your CEO, Thomas Bradley. We're scheduled to sign the acquisition paperwork tomorrow morning, a $500 million deal that would save your airline from bankruptcy." She turned the phone screen toward him, showing the calendar appointment. "But I'm thinking perhaps Westland Airlines isn't the right fit for Washington Enterprises after all." The blood drained from Captain Harmon's face as he finally registered who was standing before him. Murmurs from other passengers grew louder, and several had their phones out, recording the confrontation. There seems to have been a misunderstanding," Captain Harmon stammered. "Indeed there has," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying throughout the now-silent cabin. "And it's going to cost your company $500 million. The man across the aisle let out a low whistle. "That's what I call consequences." Captain Harmon seemed momentarily paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing without producing words. Finally, he managed to say, "Ms. Washington, I assure you this was not, I didn't realize that I was the CEO of Washington Enterprises," Eleanor finished for him, "or that I belonged in business class despite being black." Melissa stepped forward, distress evident on her face. "Ms. Washington, on behalf of Westland Airlines, I sincerely apologize for this incident. Captain Harmon does not represent our company's values." Eleanor addressed Melissa directly, her tone softening slightly. "I believe you, Melissa. Unfortunately, Captain Harmon is not the first person to make assumptions about me based on my appearance. But as the potential new owner of this airline, I have to consider what this incident reveals about the company culture." The word owner rippled through the cabin, and passengers exchanged glances. The significance of what they were witnessing began to dawn on everyone present. Captain Harmon, now visibly sweating, attempted damage control. "Ms. Washington, please, if we could discuss this privately." "I think we've had enough discussion, Captain," Eleanor interrupted. "I'll be speaking directly with Mr. Bradley about this incident immediately after we land. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to enjoy the remainder of my flight in the seat I paid for." Thoroughly chastised, Captain Harmon retreated toward the cockpit. As he left, Brian approached Eleanor with a fresh glass of water. "Ms. Washington, is there anything I can get for you?" "No, thank you, Brian. I appreciate your professionalism throughout this situation," Eleanor replied. As Brian moved away, the gentleman across the aisle leaned over. "Robert Thompson," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "I couldn't help but overhear you're acquiring Westland." Eleanor shook his hand. "Eleanor Washington, and yes, that was the plan until about 5 minutes ago." Robert Thompson chuckled. "I don't blame you. I've been flying this airline for 15 years, and while most of the staff are excellent, there have been incidents. I'm a retired judge from Boston, and I've seen plenty of discrimination cases in my time." "It never seems to end, does it?" Eleanor commented. "Progress is slow," Robert agreed. But it happens. My father wouldn't have been allowed in this cabin at all when he was my age. At least now it's just the occasional dinosaur like our captain who causes problems. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Jenkins speaking. We're experiencing some minor turbulence ahead. Captain Harmon has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign as a precaution. Please return to your seats and keep your seatbelts fastened. Thank you. Eleanor and Robert exchanged knowing glances at the conspicuous absence of Captain Harmon from the announcement. As the flight continued, word of the confrontation spread throughout the aircraft. Passengers from economy occasionally walked past the business-class cabin, ostensibly heading to the lavatory, but clearly trying to catch a glimpse of the black CEO who had put the captain in his place. When the flight landed in Atlanta, Eleanor remained seated as the other passengers began to deplane. She had already texted Marcus, updating him on the situation and asking him to wait for her outside security. As she finally rose to leave, Melissa approached her. "Ms. Washington, Mr. Bradley is waiting for you at the gate. He was already at the airport for another meeting and came immediately when he heard about the incident." "Thank you, Melissa," Eleanor said. She collected her briefcase from the overhead bin and made her way to the front of the aircraft. At the door, Captain Harmon stood with another man in a business suit whom Eleanor recognized as Thomas Bradley, the CEO of Westland Airlines. Captain Harmon looked thoroughly miserable. "Ms. Washington," Thomas Bradley greeted her, his face grave. "I can't begin to tell you how deeply sorry I am for what occurred on this flight. It's completely unacceptable and does not represent our company values." "Mr. Bradley," Eleanor acknowledged him with a nod. "I'm afraid we have much to discuss." "Absolutely," Bradley agreed. "I've arranged for a private room in our executive lounge, and Captain Harmon has something he'd like to say to you." Captain Harmon stepped forward, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. "Ms. Washington, I offer my most sincere apology for my inexcusable behavior. There is no justification for how I treated you." Eleanor regarded him coolly. "Thank you for your apology, Captain, but I think we both know it's coming a bit late and for the wrong reasons." Bradley winced at her words but didn't contradict her. "Ms. Washington, if you'll follow me, we can speak privately." Eleanor followed Bradley through the terminal to Westland's executive lounge. As they walked, Bradley attempted to make conversation. "I understand your son is waiting for you," he said. "We can make this brief if you need to get going." "Marcus knows where I am," Eleanor replied. "And this conversation can't be rushed, Thomas. What happened today raises serious concerns about the acquisition." Bradley nodded solemnly as he led her into a small, well-appointed conference room. "Can I get you anything? Water?" "Coffee, water is fine," Eleanor said, taking a seat at the table. Once they were settled, Bradley leaned forward earnestly. "Eleanor, I want you to know that Captain Harmon will be suspended immediately pending a full investigation. His behavior today goes against everything we stand for as a company." "Does it?" Eleanor questioned. "Because from where I was sitting, it seemed quite emblematic of deeper issues within Westland. This isn't just about one captain, Thomas. It's about a culture that allowed him to feel comfortable behaving that way." Bradley sighed heavily. "You're right, of course. We've been so focused on the financial struggles that we've perhaps neglected some of the cultural aspects of the company. But that's exactly why this acquisition is so important. Washington Enterprises has always been a leader in diversity and inclusion. We need that leadership." "That's a convenient position to take now," Eleanor observed. "But I have to consider whether Westland is truly ready for the kind of transformation required." "What can I do to convince you?" Bradley asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "The future of 6,000 employees depends on this deal, Eleanor." Eleanor was silent for a moment, considering. Throughout her career, she had faced countless instances of discrimination, from subtle slights to blatant prejudice like today's incident. Each time she had to decide whether to walk away or use her position to effect change. "I need to make a phone call," she finally said. "Is there somewhere private I can go?" "Of course," Bradley said, standing quickly. "Use this room, I'll wait outside." Once alone, Eleanor called Marcus. "Son, I need your perspective on something." She recounted the incident on the plane and her current dilemma, whether to proceed with the acquisition or walk away. "What would Dad say?" Marcus asked after listening to the whole story. Eleanor smiled sadly. James had always been her moral compass in difficult situations. "He'd probably remind me of what he used to tell us about his days on the road in the 60s. Don't just get a seat at the table, change what's being served." "Sounds like you already know what to do, Mom," Marcus said. "Either way, I've got your back." "Thanks, son. I'll see you soon." Eleanor ended the call and took a moment to gather her thoughts before inviting Bradley back in. "Here's what's going to happen. she said as Bradley took his seat. The acquisition will proceed, but with new conditions. First, Captain Harmon will not be suspended. He'll be required to undergo extensive diversity and inclusion training and then become part of Westland's new D&I initiative, sharing his experience and what he's learned. Bradley looked surprised. You want to keep him on? Firing him solves nothing, Eleanor explained. It just removes the symptom while the disease remains. Second, Washington Enterprises will implement a comprehensive cultural transformation program throughout Westland, starting from the top down. Every executive, including yourself, will participate. Absolutely, Bradley agreed quickly. Whatever you think is necessary. Third, Eleanor continued, the acquisition price will be reduced by $50 million. That money will instead fund a new scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in aviation, named after my late husband, James Washington. Bradley hesitated only briefly before nodding. Done. Anything else? Yes. Melissa and Brian, the flight attendants who stood up for what was right today, will be promoted to leadership positions within the new training program we'll establish. I'll make it happen, Bradley promised. Then we have a deal, Eleanor said, extending her hand. The signing will proceed as scheduled tomorrow morning. As they shook hands, Bradley's relief was palpable. Thank you for giving us this chance, Eleanor. I promise you won't regret it. I'll hold you to that, Thomas, Eleanor replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, my son is waiting. Outside security, Marcus embraced his mother tightly. You okay, Mom? I'm fine, Eleanor assured him. Just another day of breaking barriers. So the deal is still on, Marcus asked as they walked toward the parking garage. With some modifications, Eleanor explained her new terms as they made their way to Marcus's car. The James Washington Scholarship, Marcus said thoughtfully as they reached the car. Dad would have loved that. He always said education was the key to changing the world, Eleanor agreed, sliding into the passenger seat. And he was right, but so is having people in positions of power who can open doors for others. As Marcus drove them home, Eleanor gazed out at the Atlanta skyline. City had changed so much since she and James had moved there in 1990. Progress had been made, certainly, but today's incident was a stark reminder of how much work remained. You know, Marcus said, breaking into her thoughts, that captain has no idea how lucky he is. Most people would have destroyed his career without a second thought. Destruction is easy, Eleanor replied. Transformation is harder but more lasting. Your father taught me that. He'd be proud of you today, Mom. I know I am. Eleanor smiled at her son, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the legacy she and James had created, not just a successful business, but a family grounded in values and purpose. The next morning, the acquisition signing proceeded as planned. When Eleanor entered the conference room at Washington Enterprises headquarters, she was surprised to see Captain Harmon sitting quietly in a corner, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Thomas Bradley approached her. He asked to be here, Bradley explained quietly. Said he wanted to witness the moment and personally commit to the changes ahead. Eleanor nodded, appreciating the gesture for what it was, a first small step on a longer journey. As the signing ceremony concluded, Eleanor addressed the gathered executives from both companies. Today marks not just a business transaction, but the beginning of a transformation. Westland Airlines will emerge stronger not only financially, but culturally. We will lead by example, showing that diversity and inclusion aren't just buzzwords, but competitive advantages. Together, we will create an airline that truly serves all people with dignity and respect. The room erupted in applause. And as Eleanor looked around at the faces black, white, young, old, men, women, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why she had built Washington Enterprises, why she had persevered through countless instances of discrimination and doubt. Not just to succeed personally, but to create space for others to rise. Later that evening, as Eleanor sat in her home office reviewing the final paperwork, she came across a handwritten note that had been slipped into the folder. It was from Captain Harmon. Ms. Washington, it read, I will never be able to adequately apologize for my behavior yesterday. It has forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself that I've avoided for too long. I don't ask for forgiveness, but I do promise to use this experience to become a better person and to help others avoid making the same mistakes. Thank you for the opportunity to learn and grow rather than simply be punished. Respectfully, Richard Harmon. Eleanor placed the note back in the folder. Second chances were rare in business, just as they were in life. But sometimes, transformation began with a single moment of reckoning, a confrontation on an airplane, a deal almost lost, a scholarship born from adversity. She picked up a framed photo of James from her desk, his warm smile as vivid now as it had been in life. We did it, honey, she whispered. Another seat at the table, another menu changed. Outside her window, the Atlanta sky was painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun set on a day of new beginnings. For Eleanor Washington, for Westland Airlines, and perhaps even for Captain Richard Harmon, the journey of transformation had only just begun. But as James had always reminded her during the darkest days of building their company, the most meaningful journeys often start with the most difficult first steps. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.